This video is sponsored by Squarespace.
The A7IV, strictly from a photographer's perspective. What is it like using this camera versus just knowing the specs? Shadow right there, I want that in my composition. And good. I'm sure a lot of A7III users are wondering, what's new about this camera? Is it even worth upgrading to? But more than anything, I feel that it's important to see if this 33 megapixel sensor is an improvement over the old 24 megapixel sensor of the A7III in terms of dynamic range, colors. Do this breakdown toward the end of this video, but long story short, you're not gonna want to buy the A7IV just because you want better image quality. More on that later. First thing I noticed when using the A7IV is the EVF. So we got a 3.68 million dot EVF in the A7IV versus 2.3 on the A7III. And it's almost like looking at the world with your eyes half open when you look into the A7III's viewfinder. As someone who mainly uses the Sony A1, which has the best EVF in the game, 9-point-something million, the main reason why I don't pick up the A7III anymore is not because of the image quality. I love the file sizes coming out of here. It's just the electronic viewfinder is just so small, and it's like going back in time. You don't know what you're missing out on until you actually try it. It makes a big difference in the overall experience, reviewing your images in the EVF on a bright sunny day, being able to see the details more. And the A7IV is very, very comparable to the Sony A1. The other things that I instantly noticed with the A7IV is the autofocus performance is dramatically improved. And this one has 759 phase detection autofocusing points, which leads me to believe that it is the same as the A1, which has the same amount of phase detection autofocus points. This camera having the latest processor and having actual tracking autofocus like all the modern cameras have, it's a huge difference. That alone, just the autofocus alone, makes the upgrade from the A7III to the A7IV worth it. But how much better is the autofocus on the A7IV? And that's gonna just depend on who you are. Now, on spec sheet, it's the same as the A1, but clearly it's not gonna give you the same performance because the A1 has a stacked sensor. It's getting to a point where these older toys are still so good that it's hard to justify, right? It's hard to justify that jump. The A7III is no slouch. If you're shooting more standstill models, objects, portraits, whatever it is, it's like buying the top tier MacBook and just surfing the internet on it. You're not gonna notice that much of a difference, but if you're anybody else, you're shooting weddings, events, families, kids, whatever it is, anything moving, or even you're hybrid shooting, you do video as well. The subject tracking more than anything else is life-changing. I'm gonna just say life-changing. The camera's ability to track an object where their eyes are not showing, their face is not showing, it's just next level. Now, another thing that you're gonna instantly notice is the ergonomics of the A7IV are much improved over the A7III. You're getting the same body as the A7S III that's filming me right now, except for one thing, and that is the mode dial. But I like that you can control it with just your index finger, so you can go from photo to video without having to even take your eye off the viewfinder. Anybody out there that's currently using the A7III, I'm telling you, you're missing out. This bigger body style, this is definitely the sweet spot when you look at all the Sony cameras from the past. See, the thing is that Sony back in the day was competing with DSLR. So they made their cameras small and lightweight because they wanted to kind of, hey, we can do the same thing you're doing, but we could do it a lot smaller and lighter. But the sacrifice is, these cameras are smaller, they overheat, and they don't really feel that good in the hand, let's just be honest. So now we've evolved to this body style where it's a little thicker. It feels so much better in the hand. But one thing I'm kind of curious about, as a photographer first, even though I am a creator, most video-centric cameras that Sony has released, they usually put the record button there, and more photo-centric cameras have the C1 and C2 right there. And I love having the C1, C2, like on my A1, but it's not a big deal. This is more of a hybrid shooter's camera, and that's me just being picky. Also, look at this, the exposure compensation dial. You see we have no numbers there because you can program that. We got the flip screen that everyone would have complained about if they didn't have. But now, that means that you can navigate your menus. You can pitch to zoom when you take a photo with your fingers, like everyone tries when you go to a wedding and they try to zoom in on your photo and try to do this like an iPhone. Now, here is the main event. Wait for it. boom, like the Sony A1, and that's the only other camera that has it in the Sony lineup, where the shutter comes down and it blocks the sensor from getting dust in it. So I actually asked someone from Sony why every camera doesn't have this feature right here, because we know our sensors are magnets for dust. And what they said was when Canon introduced this, they had a lot of cameras coming in because people were touching the shutter. That's a very expensive part, and they were having issues with that. I guess that's why Sony was kind of like late to the party, but I hope every camera from now on has this feature. No matter what Sony camera I use around here, I can't stop down to like f8 because I'm gonna see those big balls of dust on the corner. It's inevitable. My flash photographers out there, you're gonna like this one. The A7IV has and shares the same feature as my Sony A1. The thing with using flash and mirrorless cameras is that when your camera detects a flash trigger, what's gonna happen is the screen is automatically gonna get brighter. This is my ambient exposure, and then when I let it go, then you see the screen gets brighter because it wants to be able to focus on the mannequin. And so on my A7 III, I have C3 as my button, so where like I could see my ambient exposure. On the A7 IV, you don't have to hold down a button. Just like the Sony A1, I can just map this button here, and with a click of a button, I don't have to hold this while adjusting my settings. I can just press this and basically turn off the effect of this. Like this is not even here. And I can just go ahead and lock in my ambient, and then I could just press that, and now the screen gets brighter so that I can acquire focus easier. So here is the comparison between the A7 Mark IV and the A7 Mark III, both using the new 70-200 2.8. I underexposed both images drastically so I could check and see the file flexibility, what the dynamic range looks like on both of these images. And I gotta send a shout out to my sponsor, and that is Squarespace. So if you are looking for a website, a blog, or even you wanna start an online store, check out Squarespace. Remember when Instagram went down for a half a day? One of my friends was like, man, like this kind of reminded me that I need a website. That kind of hit home with me because it is so true. What if Instagram goes away? What if a social media goes away and you use it as your portfolio? It's not yours and you're not entitled to it. Your website is yours. It's the professional way of presenting your work. And Squarespace makes that so easy. Anybody can start their own website. Even your grandma can do it. You don't need any kind of graphic design skill. And they also offer 24/7 customer support if you ever get stuck. A nice little bonus, if you use the coupon code Manny, you will get 10% off your first purchase. Left is the A7 Mark IV, and on the right is the A7 Mark III. What I'm gonna do is just boost up the exposure to a point. I'm gonna look at the histogram, get it to a good point. That's about proper exposure. I'm gonna boost up the shadows all the way. I'm gonna leave the highlights alone right now. All right, now I'm gonna pull up the A7 Mark IV image. I'm gonna do the same thing, pull it up to like proper exposure, about right there. And now I'm gonna boost the shadows all the way. And now we're like at a very similar place here with both images. Now I'm gonna see what happens when I zoom in. When I zoom in near her face, there's less noise in the bokeh, in the background. Her face on the A7 Mark III is noisier. I do see a lot more noise in the hair and the ponytail versus on the A7 Mark IV, I'm not seeing those noise patterns. So just by comparing this one image, I can already see there is an advantage shooting with the A7 Mark IV, but then again, this is a very, very extreme circumstance. And this is something that I wouldn't even do. I don't underexpose my images like that. I properly expose or expose for the highlight on like the hair, you know? So here are two other images of Devin, and this one is, okay, actually the A7 Mark III is more, this one is properly exposed, where the A7 Mark IV, it's slightly underexposed. So technically speaking, this one should perform better in like noise when recovering shadows because there's just more light there, you know? So this one should perform better. So this one already has a disadvantage, the A7 Mark IV, but I'm gonna bump up the exposure to match this one. That's about right. So now what I'm gonna do is bump the shadows up on the A7 Mark IV, and I'm gonna boost the shadows up on this side. So, all right, so now the A7 Mark III is on this side, the A7 Mark IV is here. Let's zoom in over here by this bush. And what do I see? I mean, to be honest, they look very, very similar. My God, if I have to look this close to try to find a difference, That's a good thing for the A7 Mark III. It just goes to show that that sensor is still a top-notch sensor. So yeah, I'm seeing pretty good results on both sides, and that's just like boosting the shadows all the way. This is the A7 Mark III, and this image, A7 Mark IV. All right, so here is another example. This is the A7 Mark IV, and this is the A7 Mark III, and both of them are exactly the same settings with the 51.2. A little bit of a different angle, but let's take a look under that bridge. It's pure darkline. Let's see if we could bring that back, and let's see how noisy it looks on each one. So let's see. Okay, let's boost this up, boost those shadows up. And I think we're at a good place here where they look, oh man, this is tough. This is tough. I can't really see much of a difference here. For these two, I personally don't see much of a difference with the noise in the shadows on like under the bridge. To be honest, there isn't much of a difference that I can see here zooming in at 100%. Both just a tack sharp. This one is already just naturally just a little closer. Well, I mean, it looks closer. I was at the same distance though. I don't see much of a difference. It's very, very minimal. And I would say on a blind test, I would not be able to tell the difference between both of these images. And I pushed them pretty far. I really brought back those shadows. They look identical. With the A7 Mark IV, if you miss a shot and it's completely dark, the chances of recovering that shot with the A7 Mark IV are greater, because as you've seen, I recovered that image and it was less noise. But when you're exposing an image and it's slightly off and you're tugging and pulling at the shadows and highlights, you're getting about the same performance as the A7 Mark III. Now, is that a bad thing? I can't say it's a bad thing. It's a good thing for the A7 Mark III, and it just goes to show how sensor technology hasn't really gotten that much better. But at the end of the day, this does have a new processor, does have a little bit more resolution. I saw the benefit of this camera slightly. The images look slightly sharper, but it's not by much. And if you're looking to upgrade your camera, that's why I said you don't upgrade to the A7 Mark IV simply for image quality. The images are just way too similar to the A7 Mark III. I think the bigger deciding factors are other things like the autofocus, the ergonomics. I spent a lot of time on ergonomics, but ergonomics is a big thing. The way the camera feels in the hand, that's a big part of the experience of using a camera. And this body style is my favorite body style. There's a lot to love about this camera. And hey, everyone's into video nowadays, huh? You know, this has it. This is the all-in-one camera that can do it all. And I'm gonna do a dedicated video about the video on this camera because I want to feature my car in some of my videos as well. So I'm gonna use my car for that. But this is like what you call, this is a good incremental upgrade to the A7 III. There's nothing groundbreaking about this camera, but they put the right amount of things in here to kind of like make it slightly better almost in every way than the A7 III, and that's including even the image quality. All right, so that is kind of like my first impressions of the A7 Mark IV from a photographer's perspective, and I try to keep it strictly photography, although I really care about video because that's mostly what I do nowadays. It's the night before the launch, you know how that goes. Well, my YouTuber friends know the grind is real out here. No sleep on these nights, let me tell you. Am I gonna buy it though? I mean, I already got the A1, the S3, the FX3, the A7C, the A7 III, A7R3. Do I need this camera? I mean, I don't know. I'm gonna buy it.